Okay, so we start by pulling out the leaf lard pieces. And when they come on the gammels that are those straight gammels, we've got to put the whole thing on the table. So the first cut we're gonna make is right after this turn right here. It's gonna be this joint. And then we cut straight off. When we're doing retail hogs, we'll cut this piece down. But when we're doing custom hogs, we just cut the belly straight so that it ends up square, because otherwise it's gonna be trim anyway. So it's just one less step. And then we're gonna count 1, 2, 3. Between the third and the fourth rib, we'll cut that straight off, which will separate that middle loin section and the shoulder. Where this is a whole hog, we just prep all of them first. So again, on this end, 1 past the turn, right on that joint. You want to let the saw do the work. Don't push the saw too hard because it'll make the blade bend around. So we're going to count 1, 2, 3. Make sure that ends up square. And especially on the shoulder blade, I can feel that hit right there on that shoulder blade. I'll saw really slow and not a lot of pressure until it gets through that. And so that way it makes a clean cut here. If I push too far hard, then it tends to round out and then you end up with not a straight clean cut on the shoulder side. So now I'm gonna cut these shoulders. My first cut, I'm gonna cut right across here. So it goes just separating out the cushion, the picnic cushion in the butt. And where these are retail, or these are custom hogs, the way we flow through is just to make sure we can get through them as quick as we can. We've got 30 hogs to cut today. So I'm gonna remove this jowl piece. And then these are all bone-in pork shoulders. So I'm gonna cut that picnic into 2 pieces. And then on the butt, I'll cut 2 pieces off. So they end up with 3 pieces there. This jowl piece, I'll trim off this extra fat. And this is just gonna go into sausage. When I'm cutting through here, I wanna be careful not to cut too deep. I wanna cut just the fat off. On the inside of this cheek right here, I wanna lean this out. It'll make the sausage a little bit too fatty if I leave all that stuff on there. Next piece is that back leg. So I'll cut a couple roasts out of these sirloins. So I'm gonna cut that right up to where the H-bone piece is. So here's that first turn. So the loin is here. I usually cut this first roast about half of the way between that point and the H-bone. So that roast comes off, and the next one, I use that H-bone as a guide. That way you get 2 even roasts off the sirloin end. And then they want their hams and the shanks on there. So I'll cut these other 2 and then we'll go to the loin. Make sure you catch the sternum. There's a sternum piece that sticks out. Sometimes you'll have a little hidden bone right there on the jowl. You got to make sure you catch that so you don't leave that piece of bone on your trim. this bone-in loin, I'm going to be cutting right here where the edge of that shoulder blade is, and then I'm going to cut down until about right here, just about 1 inch away from where that is. Oops. And then trim piece on this, I'm going to trim it up a little bit before I cut it, so that way I don't have to go back and trim all of the chops. Our spec for fat is 1/4 inch. So I'm going to cut this fat down to about 1/4 inch before I cut the chops, so it saves me a little bit of time versus trimming every single chop. I'm cutting this fat off, make long, even strokes. So that way you don't have little chunky pieces on the back of your pork chops. We cut our chops 3/4 inch thick, unless the customer specifies different. As I'm breaking this down, we've got somebody on the table trimming through shoulders and the sirloin roast, and then somebody on the other table prepping the hams and also prepping the bacons. So by the time I get done cutting these, we should be about done running the whole hog, and then I'm ready to get the cure weight on the paper and then start the next order. So on these bacons, we'll start by cutting off this piece of skirt, which just goes into trim. We'll cut up under the ribs, so pulling off these spare back ribs. Be careful not to go too deep. Don't want to gouge that bacon. Sometimes I'll score to draw myself that line coming across, so these ribs come off pretty easy. Keeps everything nice and clean. Hug up under the sternum as I'm pulling that off, and then we trim, instead of leaving these as spare backs, we'll cut these as St. Louis. So just cut right across to where that sternum piece is, and we cut that square out so it leaves them nice and square. And then on this pork belly, the last piece you want to cut is trim up this fat so that it makes it nice and square and ends up with a good looking bacon. And then check this end right here to make sure that piece of sternum bone isn't there. And then it's ready to be tagged. So Jess will tag those, and then she'll get the weight, and then let me know what the final cure weight is. I'll write it on the paper and then start the next one. So when I pull the next one, before it goes onto the chain, I'm gonna check this number, make sure we've got the cutting order ready.
Here's the last order right here.
Okay. So I will put the cure weight on their paper, and their paper goes on the pile. The way we run these hogs is each board is one order. Tags, leaf lard, I will split. Yes, they wanted fresh side pork. This one, I just noticed because this one wants uncured hams. They want fresh pork legs. So second turn in, cut that square. 1, 2, 3. Two, three. Let me cut these because I'll show them those trimming pieces. So this one has fresh pork leg roast. So when they don't want their hams, they're gonna have these cut. The first cut I make is gonna square this off. I watch for the edge of that H-bone, right on the pin bone right there, that H-bone. I make a straight cut. This is just gonna be trim. And then I'll cut one there, one out of the middle, and then that shank off. So, where'd the front shank go? Okay. So I'm gonna show them how to do all that, so don't do anything on this one yet. This one had a bad stick. It's got a little bit of a blood clot. We'll trim that out. So when you're sticking, it's important to make sure that you don't stick into the shoulder, because this is what it'll do. And then you got to trim out this blood clot and bruised meat. Okay. So you can do that one. Okay, so on the fresh pork legs, this back piece, all I'm gonna do is trim it to size, and then that one's ready. So we have a spot on the table where everything goes. We put the shoulders at the front and the sirloins at the back, and then we put the fresh pork legs on the side so our wrappers know where everything's at. This piece we're just gonna cut in half, so they get 2 pieces there. This piece we're also just gonna cut in half. So we cut fresh pork legs to that size. On the front shank, make a cut both sides of this bone. And then these front picnic pieces we'll trim down. Those are in the front. Make sure that all of our fat is at a 1/4 inch. We have a 1/4 inch fat cap. Sirloins, that's that belly piece that would have been on the bacon that goes into trim. So we cut that off, just ready to go, so that it keeps that belly square. Otherwise you'd be trimming it anyway. So we leave the trim, or we're gonna be going through this roast. Trimming some of this down, 1/4 inch fat cap. And then I'll cut the front of this off a little bit just to make it a little smaller so it's not quite so big. So belly trim. Square up the roast. 1/4 inch fat. Shoulders. We'll bone out this piece. Quarter inch fat. Bone out that neck.
Off the table.
1/4 inch fat. This front piece, I'm gonna bone out the rest of this neck. This piece is where I square it off. We run one order at a time on the table. We have cues that the wrappers, when they get on the table, they'll let us know they're on the table. When they're off the table, they'll let us know they're off the table. That tells the other wrappers not to grab anything left, and that tells us to scoot the next order down. So it's important to have those verbal cues so that everybody knows what's going on and we don't mix up any of the orders. So on this hind shank, there's 2 bones that are in here. So I trim on one side and the other side of that bone. I'll open this up where I can see this other bone. I'll trim on this side and that side, and then that whole thing folds down, and then all of that comes out pretty easy. So that's all of those. Jess, did you adjust the weight? Wrappers know what they're grabbing, and then we'll set the wrappers up so that when they're pulling orders, one wrapper always pulls the exact same thing. So that way they know they're always going to be shoulder chops or shoulder roasts or sirloin roasts or pork chops. That way we've got the stamps ready by that station. They're not mixing back and forth. That helps keep everything organized and also keeps everybody caught up.